When marginalized groups are oppressed, sooner or later they will reach their limit, and today's story is a perfect example of just that. People often mix up the facts about why the Stonewall Riots are so important. The Stonewall Inn wasn't the birthplace of gay rights, it wasn't some glitzy establishment, nor was it the first gay bar in New York. So why do we care about it? Hopefully after today's story you can understand why Pride Month is such a big deal to so many people. I'd also like it to be clear that the viewer discretion disclaimer attached to this video is in relation to the violence in the story. And with that being said, let's get into it. If we go back in time, you pick a spot in the world, and they'll give you a different opinion about who a man or a woman should love. Ancient China? They acknowledged same-sex relationships were a part of their past. Same with ancient Japan. In fact, homophobia, or a dislike towards gay people, was a Western concept. So when you get to the mid-19th century, certain countries would start passing laws against homosexuality in Asia. As for Europeans, many people throughout the continent didn't care who you shared your bed with, up to and through the Middle Ages. However, around the time of the Renaissance, there was a drastic shift in opinion. People started to identify closer to their religious beliefs, and laws were passed. And so from that point forward, anyone identifying with the gay community started to live secretive lives to avoid persecution or execution. I mean, these were not low-stakes laws. You could be put to death for being gay, like Richard Puller von Hohenberg, a 15th century knight who was burned at the stake in Switzerland. Up until 1869, these crimes were called sodomy, and they referred to any unnatural sexual activity. However, men committing these acts with women typically weren't targeted. For example, in 1869, a Hungarian journalist named Karl Maria Kurt-Benny saw his friend being extorted by the military for being gay. They were looking for a payday, otherwise they were looking to arrest this guy. And after that friend was driven to suicide, Kurt-Benny wrote letters and articles fighting for gay rights, even though historians aren't clear on if Kurt-Benny was gay himself. But it was in these writings that we first see the words homosexual and heterosexual. Just 2 years earlier, his friend Karl Heinrich Ulrichs spoke out publicly and urged that anti-gay laws be repealed. Many people say that Ulrichs was the first gay person to publicly out himself. Let's call this a turning point, maybe. We're 100 years away from Stonewall, and people are already fighting for gay rights. In 1897, the first gay rights organization was founded in Berlin by Magnus Hirschfeld. In English, we call that organization the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, and at its peak it had around 700 members. That means that gay rights organizations around the world have existed as long as America's first underground metro, which is in Boston. The oldest of such organizations in the United States goes back to 1924 in Illinois, the Society for Human Rights. A national gay rights organization was founded in 1950 called the Mattagine Society. Now, did this stop the government from discharging nearly 4,400 gay men and women from the military? Or another 500 from government jobs at the beginning of the Cold War? Of course not! You see, homosexuality was diagnosed as a mental illness until 1973. So anyone who identified as such was considered a security risk. Meanwhile, Alan Turing, the mastermind behind the world's first computer and the test for artificial intelligence, which we still use to this day, he was a known homosexual. And he had just saved the world from Nazis in World War II. Without him, we might have been reading about this in these things called books. If we look back at the earlier parts of the 20th century, people are being thrown out of their homes, even if there's just a chance that they might be gay. People tossed from their homes were looking for more people like them. Big cities started to attract larger gay communities because homeless gay people were playing a numbers game. Maybe there are more people along the same wavelength where there are more people. Makes sense, right? One of the neighborhoods that attracted people of this mindset was Greenwich Village. On January 17, 1920, something happened in this country that inadvertently helped these gay communities, and that was prohibition. With the ban on alcohol, Greenwich Village became a neighborhood filled with underground speakeasies. A speakeasy is a place that sells alcohol illegally. These secret establishments were well hidden from the police and made gay patrons feel safer being themselves there. But obviously, prohibition didn't last forever. When it came to a halt in 1933, it drove gay nightlife even further underground. This is more or less because liquor laws became stricter. It was illegal to sell alcohol to suspected gay customers. At the corner of West 10th Street and Waverly Place is a bar called Julius's, which is the oldest operating gay bar on the East Coast. In 1966, 3 members of the Mattachine Society, which is that national gay rights organization, they staged a sit-in at Julius's bar. You see, when the police would do these random checks for disorderly conduct at any of these suspected gay bars, they were looking for men who were buying drinks for other men, or kissing, or chatting in a flirtatious manner. And if they were able to find something, they could actually shut the bar down, which obviously seems like discrimination against the LGBT community. So the Mattachine Society was looking for a court case. The 3 men explained their plan to the bartender at Julius's and then outed themselves as gay. The bartender played his role and refused to serve them so that they could take this case to court. And this worked. Courts declared that gays had the right to be served. However, this did not mean that an openly gay bar could easily acquire a liquor license. So some gay bars instead labeled themselves as private clubs and then sold alcohol without a liquor license. This was a huge risk. One police raid and you're done. Can you really be making that much extra money? Well, when you're extorting your gay patrons, you could. And who would do something so cruel? The Mafia. The 6th Precinct, which covers the West Village and Greenwich Village, they had corrupt police officers who would accept bribes from these Mafia heads to turn the other way when they were doing these bar raids. If they ever were going to raid, they would inform these Mafia heads. That way they could hide their booze and they could let people know that the police were on their way. One of these places was a short walk from Julius's bar, and it was called the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn was the only gay bar in town that allowed for dancing, which was a big draw. When you got there, they made you sign in, and of course, gay members of society were not interested in having themselves publicly outed should the place ever be raided, so they wouldn't write their real names when they were signing in. They'd write names like Donald Duck or Judy Garland. Coincidentally, June 27, 1969 happened to be the day of Judy Garland's funeral. Were some of the people at the Stonewall Inn that night at the funeral earlier in the day? Yes. Were the events that occurred that night related to the funeral? Absolutely not, despite what a newspaper columnist attempted to report. In the early hours of June 28, 1969, 4 police officers in plain clothes happened to already be in the Stonewall Inn. They were staking it out. Under normal circumstances, if this was a police raid, when the police came in, everyone would have to give their identification. If you didn't have a valid ID, you were escorted out and taken back to the precinct. Anyone dressed inappropriately in the eyes of these officers would be taken to the bathroom to verify their gender. And yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. This happened all the time. This was what a normal raid looked like. But this wasn't a normal raid. When these undercover officers had the visual evidence that they needed, they phoned the precinct to come and shut it down. When 4 additional officers showed up at the Stonewall Inn, the 205 people inside began to panic. Several people attempted to flee, but as you can see from the diagram here, the only way out of the Stonewall would have been out onto Christopher Street through the main entrance. The police lined everybody up, and they started checking everyone's ID, and as long as you cooperated and you had proper identification, they would tell you to exit the bar and go home. These people may have left the bar, but they didn't go home. They waited outside on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, the people still inside are sick of these raids. They are sick of having their IDs checked. The women are sick of being brought into the bathroom to verify that they were women. And so these people started to stand up for themselves. And of course, this led to the police getting more aggressive, particularly with the lesbians in the bar. This led to arrests being made, but there were no police wagons there yet. And as they waited outside of Stonewall at 1:30 in the morning, the crowd began to grow. They watched as these officers just pushed and shoved people just like them. Whether it was the high heels or the hoop earrings or the heavy makeup or the wigs, these were people who were afraid to be themselves while the sun was still up. To this day, we don't know the identity of the butch woman who was being arrested there, but she looked at the men in the crowd and yelled to them, "Why don't you guys do something?" And the people in the crowd realized, hey, why aren't we doing something? And from that point forward, the crowd only grew, and it got more and more violent. Any kind of item may have been thrown at the police, whether it was shoes or coins or beer bottles or shot glasses or stones. Within minutes, this evolved into a full-blown riot. The butch woman was able to escape from custody, and the police were actually shoved back into the bar. This went on for hours, with more and more people showing up to join the crowd, with more items being thrown, with fires being set. When more police showed up expecting the worst, they instead saw cross-dressers performing chants and kick lines like they were the Rockettes. This was unlike any riot New York had ever seen. The streets were finally cleared by 4 a.m. 13 protesters were arrested that night, while many others ended up in the hospital. But did that stop them from coming back the following night and doing it all over again? Of course not. Gay and transgendered activists like Marsha P. or Sylvia Rivera would be in attendance. These gatherings had given them a real voice that could resonate through their communities. Gay people were kissing in the streets. They were unafraid. This had never happened before. They felt liberated. Obviously, the police had to come back when thousands of people were blocking traffic, but once again, the people of Stonewall held their ground. The next few nights had poor, rainy conditions, so not nearly as many people showed up to Stonewall. However, that didn't stop another crowd from gathering outside the offices of the Village Voice and letting them know how they felt about the bad publicity. The Village Voice was a weekly culture magazine that was headquartered right down the block from the Stonewall. Overall, the riots lasted several days, and despite the chaos, there was not a single casualty, nor were there any critical injuries to any civilians or police officers. Now the question becomes, why were the Stonewall riots important? Because this was the birth of the Gay Liberation Front, the first group to publicly advocate for equal gay rights. This formation of gay liberation groups urged people in the LGBT community to be proud of who they are. The world is a better place when people are happy. 1 year after the riots, the Gay Liberation Front organized a march on Christopher Street to mark the anniversary of Stonewall. And year after year, more big cities would host their own marches, which evolved into pride parades. And as we continue to expand on the LGBT acronym, more and more people have felt comfortable in their own skin and do not feel the need to hide who they are anymore. This doesn't mean that there wouldn't be obstacles along the way, but still, the Stonewall riots offer hope to people who have felt neglected their entire lives. New voices emerged, which allowed more and more people to feel comfortable with who they are. There are still many countries with laws against queer communities, and yet still, there is a sense of optimism these days that did not exist just 54 years ago. On June 24, 2016, President Obama designated the Stonewall Inn and the area where the riots took place as a national monument. It is the first national monument celebrating gay history. And no matter how you feel about who people should love, it's impossible not to recognize the significance of this historic site. These riots, for the first time ever, made people within this community feel like they didn't need to hide who they are anymore. So that's going to do it, folks. The point of this video was to educate you on a very sensitive topic these days, and hopefully you're now better informed moving forward. Let me know what you learned in the comments. Also, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until next time, deuces, kids.